Hi, 10th graders. This is the audio recording of the story The Device by Eve L Ewing. Please follow along with the text either on the screen or in your packet as we read. After we read the story, we're going to be answering some reading questions. And before we get going here, I want to point out this word in the second line here. We talked about this word when we read the play A Raisin in the Sun, and I will not be saying it out loud, so you can read silently along as I go. The device. It wasn't like a George Washington Carver kind of thing, where one brilliant with a soldering iron made some magic and poof, a miraculous machine. It was an open source kind of situation. Thousands of high school science fair whiz kids, this and that engineering club at this and that technical college, the one black person at a bunch of Silicon Valley startups getting together with a bunch of other one black persons over craft beer and coding late into the night. Even some government folks working off the clock, or so the rumors go. Not just one person. A hive mind of black nerds, obsessive types, scientists, and inventors, but also historians and archaeologists and the odd astrologer here and there. Project Delta Mother, they called it. Goofy name, TBH, but it's whatever. When the time came to flip the switch, the sentimental, poetic ones who were in charge of communication and media and symbolism got the idea that it should be the youngest among them to do it. She stood at the front of the stage and seemed unfazed by how long the speeches went on, everyone wanting a moment at the podium to give a benediction or remember a lost comrade or shed a tear or play a short video that never turned out to be that short. She was a gangly one, a fifth grader from Providence who had started showing up at the high school robotics team meetings when the after-school science enrichment courses at her own school got cut. Her grandmother had bought her a special dress for this momentous occasion, and she didn't want to wear it, but didn't want to hurt Grandma's feelings either. So as the starched frill rubbed against the back of her legs and made her itchy, she tried to distract herself by counting the tiles on the ceiling. She was so engrossed and the speeches were so many that she almost didn't hear her name when it was called. The man in the lab coat, whose name she had forgotten, beckoned her toward the device, as the audience stood reverent and waiting. Their arms were all in the air to take photos and videos, and she thought they looked like they were about to go down a water slide, and that made her smile, which made them smile. She stood before the machine. It hummed at a low resonance, making her teeth feel funny as she got closer to it. Its 10,000 tiny lights popped into and out of momentary existence every few seconds. Twinkling bravely though the theater was bright inside. She blinked at it and began quietly humming to herself. The man in the lab coat watched her watching the device. After so many late nights with this hulking thing, seeing it in the light of day made him click his tongue. This day was no sleek reveal. No one would be gasping over pocket sizing and carefully beta testing user interfaces. The device was an inelegant hodgepodge, a reflection of the hands that made it. Bits and pieces stuck out of crevices where they should have been hidden, wire shards of hastily sawn PVC, the odd patch of duct tape. It looked like in 100 years it might be something you'd find at a yard sale. But of course, he thought after a second, wouldn't that be a success? Shouldn't the device come to be so average and commonplace that it ceases to be magic and comes to be part of everyday life for regular black people all over the country? Wasn't that the dream? He tilted his head slightly, as though it might show him a new angle on the whole thing, just as the girl reached out for the switch. In that split second, he realized for the first time that the machine might be dangerous, that having a child be the one to do it was symbolic, sure, and also very, very stupid. This was the thought that entered his head as the room filled with flashing lights and he began to panic. The device was going to explode and kill them all, and the girl would be the first to die, and he would live just long enough to see it happen. But no, those were flashbulbs, and 1,000 journalists, official and not so much, captured the moment when the girl activated the device. It roared to life, its internal cooling fans whirring furiously, lights blinking faster and faster. People in the audience began to cry. One man, a pastor who had led a booming rendition of Lift Every Voice, fainted. The girl stayed very calm. She had read the manual many times. "Hello," she said. Her voice cracked, and she cleared her dry throat and repeated herself, loudly this time. "Hello." Everyone else in the room fell silent. They waited. The device's external speakers began to crackle, like a phone sounds when wind is blowing over the mouthpiece. And then the reply came back, loud and clear, almost too loud. The man in the lab coat covered his ears. "Hello? Oh, Lord, I have prayed for this day. I knew you would find favor with me, as you have with my sister Willa. If you only guide my steps, I will be faithful." The man in the lab coat looked, wild-eyed, at the girl. He began to gesture at her frantically, but she only nodded, unperturbed, and pulled a folded-up piece of paper out of her dress pocket. She had practiced for this. As the audience looked on in awe, she spoke, slowly and deliberately. Mostly she had it memorized, but she looked down at the paper every few seconds to be sure not to mess up. "Hello. Please stay calm. This is not God, or a dream, and you are not going crazy. I am talking to you from many years in the future." She gulped once and continued. "I am using a device built by the colored people of this country." She felt funny saying colored, but the history people said it would be better that way. "As you know, we were stolen from our homeland and brought here. We have had many difficulties, and our families have been hurt and separated. In my time, we are not slaves, but we face challenges. We need help from our ancestors, but you have been lost to us. So we worked very hard and made this special machine. It allows us to talk to you inside your head, even though we are far apart. It is like yelling over a river." The poets had added that part, and it hadn't made much sense when she first practiced that line, but now it seemed right. "I am your great-great-great-granddaughter. I am the first person in history to use this device. People from all over are here with me watching. We have many questions for you, and other people will use the device to talk to their ancestors too. So now, grandmother, my first question is..." She looked down at the paper to get it exactly right. "What words can you offer us to help us be free as Black people in a world that does not love us?" The girl stared at the device as though a face might appear amidst the plastic and metal, then gulped again and folded the paper back up and stuck it in a sweaty rectangle back into her pocket. She turned toward the audience, seeing them as though for the first time. The device was crackling and humming and buzzing and shaking, and so were they. People had their shoes off and feet up on the seats of the auditorium, rocking forward and back like babies. They wept, they grinned. They scribbled into notebooks and clicked photograph after photograph. They bit their nails. They grasped at each other's shoulders, holding each other up while they waited and waited. The man in the lab coat sat cross-legged on the stage, leaning against the podium as though alone in his own living room, and stared at her with his mouth agape. She turned back toward the device, wondering if the connection had been lost. "Grandma," she began, but the sound from the device cut her off, echoing across the auditorium, bouncing against brick and plaster and ricocheting in everyone's ears. It was laughter. It began hoarse and raspy, and then unfolded into ringing peals, and gasps, sounding and resounding louder and louder. The device sputtered and flashed and began to get hot, tape curling off and the smell of melting plastic curling forth from the rear vents, and the audience gasped, and the woman somewhere in America, sometime in America, laughed and laughed and laughed. And the little girl put her hands on her own cheeks and felt their warmth, and the woman laughed. And the lights in the auditorium began to flicker and fade, and still the woman laughed. She laughed and laughed and laughed. All right, that was the end of The Device by Eve L Ewing. I hope you enjoyed the story. Now you are going to start working on the reading questions for The Device.